The Long March of Everyman. Themes and variations from the history of the people in Britain. Program 3, Alfred's Duel. Anglo Saxon England. Composed and produced by Michael Mason under the direction of H.R. Loyne, Professor of Medieval History at University College, Cardiff.
Lo, 'tis nigh on 350 years that we and our fathers have inhabited this lovely land.
Coxius Thermus pays his respects to the genie of the land of Britain.
No sooner were the Romans gone than the Picts and Scots, like worms, which in the heat of midday come from their holes, hastily land again from their canoes. All the councillors were so blinded that as a protection to their country they sealed its doom by inviting among them the fierce and impious Saxons.
And they started settling and then gradually bringing in more and more of their own people until they themselves, instead of being the sort of paid protectors, became the enemy and started to try to take over the land and the country from the Britons, which they did eventually succeed in doing.
I work very hard. I go out at dawn and I drive the oxen to the field and yoke them to the plough. However stark the winter is, I dare not stay at home for fear of my Lord. And every day I have to plough a full acre or more. I have a boy who drives the oxen with a goad, and even now he's hoarse from cold and shouting. I fill the ox bins with hay and I water them, and I clear out the dung.
We think so readily about Anglo-Saxons as farmers, and so they were. But we think of them too as rather earthy people, and that's true only up to a point.
The wave over the wave, a weird thing I saw, through-wrought and wonderfully ornate, a wonder on the wave, water became bone.
An Anglo-Saxon riddle. What is this weird thing? Well, the answer simply is ice. But it stands for a deeper riddle needing a much deeper answer. How do we get inside the skin of the Anglo-Saxons?
Through-wrought and wonderfully ornate, a wonder on the wave.
Anglo-Saxon attitude to the sea. It seems to be a real love-hate relationship. Something to be feared. Cold,
Wave,
forbidding,
wave,
dark.
The wave, the wave.
I, aching-hearted, on ice-cold seas, have wasted whole winters. Hail flew in showers. There was no sound there but the slam of waves along an icy sea. For men's laughter, there was curlew call. There were the cries of gannets. For mead drinking, the music of the gull.
I'm a fisherman. I put my net into the river, cast out my hook and bait, set up my creel, and whatever they capture, I grab. But I can't catch as many as I could sell. I'm safer on the river in my boat than out whaling with many ships. I'd rather catch fish and get killed.
Say?
Sea.
Middle-Yarth?
Middle-earth.
The Anglo-Saxon farmer, provided he were given peace, could enjoy his life. But dangers were always close. The forest land, near his settlement, the sea outside.
Sea.
How loving the welcome of the Frisian wife, when floats offshore the keel come home again.
She calls him within walls. Her own husband howls at anchor, washes salt stains from his stiff shirt, brings out clothes clean and fresh for her lord on land again. Love's need is met.
Land? Angleland.
England.
And furnished forth the face of earth with limbs and leaves.
Angleland.
The structure of our vocabulary, the normal little words that we use, are Anglo Saxon.
Shire.
Village. House.
Think of the home and the hearth as truly the focal point.
Hearth.
Home.
For men's laughter, for mead drinking.
They were great feasters in hall, and the refrain that comes out of their poetry consistently is one of joys in hall. And when, too, the drinking feast really gets underway, one of the great epithets in Beowulf to show that a man is scared stiff is a alu shearwan, terror as of the loss of ale. And they were undoubtedly great drinkers.
Glee.
Mirth.
Laughter.
These recurring images of warmth at the centre and winter outside. The Grendel of Beowulf.
It was with pain that the powerful spirit, dwelling in darkness, endured that time, hearing daily the hall filled with loud merriment. There was music of the harp.
Life is perilous, life can be short. But while it is lived, it can be gleeful, it can live in the warmth of a hall, it can experience the joy of friends and of the Lord who will be the giver of gifts.
The clear song of the poet, perfect in his telling of the remote first making of man's race. He told how long ago the Lord formed earth, a plain bright to look upon, locked in ocean, exulting established the sun and the moon as lights to illumine the land dwellers, and furnished forth the face of earth with limbs and leaves.
Woods.
Limbs and leaves.
Fields.
Up to now, men had cleared the lighter soils, they'd cleared the hills, they'd cleared some of the valleys. But with the Saxons, the whole country began to be a man-made thing.
Lo, 'tis nigh on 350 years that we and our fathers have inhabited this lovely land.
Villages dominated the scene of late Saxon England.
These are the 3.5 ploughlands of Brabourne. First from Friarborna to the Hollow Way.
The most striking thing about them must have been the huge open fields that surrounded them.
From the Hollow Way up across the town to the common at Coara Wood.
No England of hedges in Saxon times. Round the open fields, the common pasture that was shared by all the villagers, still very rough, still dotted with woodlands.
From Coara Wood to the King's Lower Copse, from King's Lower Copse to Bodsham.
So the company of men led a careless life. All was well with them, until one began to encompass evil, an enemy from hell.
The war wolves waded across, mourned not for the water, the Viking Warband.
Never before had such terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race. It were never thought that such havoc could be made from sea.
Grendel they called this cruel spirit, The fell and fen his fastness was, the march his haunt.
Grendel could be used almost as an image to give poetic meaning to the whole of the Anglo Saxon period. Grendel is the monster from outside.
The war wolves waded across, mourned not for the water. The Viking Warband came west over Pant, bearing shield boards, over sheer water, and up onto land, Lindenwood braced.
Grendel is the monster to be feared in the fen fastnesses. And this is perhaps the attitude of a successful farmer, as well as the attitude of a fearful farmer. He likes to clear his forests. He likes to drain his swamps. The Grendels live there. Give him good arable.
Locked in ocean, a plain bright to look upon.
You have the feeling that there is encircling sea around. And this again seems to be just right for a society that is beginning to master its environment, beginning to tame the earth.
Furnished forth the face of earth with limbs and leaves.
In settling and cultivating the country, the Anglo-Saxons gave us our village names, often leaving their personal names with Ham, which meant a pretty substantial settlement, usually consisted of land that was owned by many families.
Saxmundum.
Personal names plus Tun, which was a settlement often of rather a smaller nature, though this name went on longer in time.
Alfred.
Personal names plus Berry, a fortified settlement.
Aylesbury.
They spent their time consolidating their hold.
Deeds, achievements, that after speakers should respect the name. Aylesbury.
In eastern England, Kent, the home counties as we call them now.
Alfred.
Parts of Yorkshire, East Anglia.
Saxmundum.
And by the middle of the 7th century, the Welsh had been pushed far to the west, into Somerset and Devon, into Wales, into Cumbria, and the English were left in possession of the greater part of what we now know as England.
England.
Engleland.
The Anglo-Saxons, when they finally settled and overcame the British, they did call them very wrongly foreigners, strangers, Welshers, and from this we get the name for the country Wales and the name for the people Welsh, and they also used it as a term for their servants. They called them Welsh.
Wales.
Wales.
Kinewulf frequently fought great battles against the Welsh.
Out of 300 champions who hastened to Cattræth, alas, none came back but for one man.
Much more important are the double battles of Durham in the southwest in the 570s and of Chester in the northwest in the early part of the 7th century. Those are the two battles that mark the decisive push to the west and the splitting up of the Celtic elements in Britain.
Sword.
Plowshare.
I work very hard. I go out at dawn and I drive the oxen to the field and yoke them to the plough.
Bowler's Field. Penny D. Furlong. Churchford. Berrymawick Mill. Shipmancroft.
It's been suggested that there was as much land under arable in 1086, the time Doomsday was taken, as there was in 1906.
Warring holds Catsfield from the Count. Elfhelm held it from King Edward. Then it paid taxes as for 1.5 hides, now for 1 1/4. There is land there for 7 ploughs. In the domain is 1 plough and 11 villeins with 2 cottagers which have 8 ploughs. There is a small church and a mill serving the hall.
A man, when he thought of the ideal picture of a gleeful society thought naturally of a Lord's Hall.
Lord?
The Lord was Llafweyard, the guardian of the loaf.
Lady?
The lady was Llafdiga, the lady who made the loaf, who kneaded the bread.
Then to Hrothgar was granted glory in battle, mastery of the field. So friends and kinsmen gladly obeyed him, and his band increased to a great company. It came into his mind that he would give commands for the construction of a huge mead hall, a house greater than men on earth ever had heard of, and share the gifts God had bestowed on him upon its floor with folk young and old, apart from the public land and the persons of slaves. He made good his boast, gave out rings, armbands at the banquet.
Birgnoth owns this dagger.
Hawkstan owns this ring. Feasting.
Firelight.
Gold.
Gifts.
A lord was expected to be a great giver of gifts, a giver of gold adornments, loyalty lord to man cemented by acts of generosity, loyalty of man to his lord.
My deed shall give no warrant, for words of blame to steadfast men on Stour, now he is stretched lifeless.
Earlig's gun, friend at Earl.
That I left the battlefield, a lordless man turned for home. The iron shall take me, point or edge.
Pelver had this stone setting up, our Haralaf.
Once an oath of loyalty is sworn from man to lord, then that oath is binding.
Waring holds Catsfield from the Count. There are 4 acres of pasture and woodland for 3 pigs and rough pasturage for 5 pigs.
These are the 3.5 ploughlands of Braeburn, from the bishop's boundary south to Stocker's Garter, from Stocker's Garter to Viking's Field, from Viking's Field to Collipit, from Collipit to the boundary of Sibborn-Borna.
Warwick holds Catsfield, and there is a mill serving the hall.
Home,
hearth, these recurring images of warmth at the centre,
mirth,
laughter,
glee,
weird, and winter outside,
weird.
The nearest synonym we have to weird is fate, but it's not the complete synonym. I think to the Anglo Saxons, weird was more than what we think of as fate. It was more personalized. There's more the feeling of monsters about.
Grendel they called this cruel spirit. The fell and fen his fastness was, the march his haunt.
I, Emera, am skilled in sorcery.
Against every poisonous swelling, on a Friday, churn butter which had been milked from a neat or a hind, all of one colour, sing over it 9 times, Acre, Iveve, Earnim, Nadni.
The religion we've held up to now has no power at all in their use.
The king, holding a council with his wise men, asked of each what he thought of this new worship of God which was preached. One said,
O king, the present life of men on earth appears to me to be as if, when you are sitting at supper with your ealdormen and thanes in the winter time, and a fire is lighted in the midst and the whole warmed, but everywhere outside the storms of wintry rain and snow are raging, a sparrow should come and fly rapidly through the hole, coming in at one door and immediately out at the other. Whilst it's inside, it's not touched by the storm of winter, but yet that tiny space of calm gone in a moment, From winter at once returning to winter, it's lost to your sight. Thus this life of man appears for a little while, but of what's to follow, or of what went before, we are entirely ignorant. Hence, if this new teaching brings greater certainty, it seems fit to be followed.
A fine story, and beautifully told. This is given to us by Bede, a very skillful historian in his own right. It's fine history, too, and the Latin is good. From winter into winter. The Anglo Saxons were literate, and literate not in one language, but in two, in Anglo Saxon and in Latin.
The king gave open consent for Paulinus to preach the gospel, and renouncing idolatry, acknowledged that he received the faith of Christ.
God saves by his mercy Ada, who wrote this.
A drink for fiend sick men, to be drunk out of a church bell. 10 herbs and a church lichen of Christ make. Obtain the drink from clear ale.
Magic is so bound up with folk medicine and a little bit of a remnant of folk religion.
Sing 7 masses over the warts. Take the rust of a bell clapper and tamper it with water and drink it.
The church was anxious about it, and the evidence was suppressed. There is a subterranean world in Anglo-Saxon experience that we know only a little of.
It was with pain that the powerful spirit, dwelling in darkness, endured that time.
Life is perilous, life can be short.
I, both Maru, make my will. I grant to St. Peter's Monastery at Bath an armlet of gold, 2 gold crucifixes, and a set of mass vestments.
Wealth is lent us, friends are lent us, man is lent, kin is lent, and all this earth's frame shall stand empty. A warrior fights on bravely. Well is it for him who seeks forgiveness, the Heavenly Father's solace, in whom all our fastness stands. In the earth realm all is crossed. Weird's will changeth the world.
Weird was there for every man to see, and increased the sense of external evil at work in his universe. But remember, the Anglo-Saxons quickly accepted Christianity.
The king gave open consent for Paulinus to preach the gospel, and renouncing idolatry, acknowledged that he received the faith of Christ.
When the Anglo-Saxon wants to talk about theology, for example, he is capable of abstraction, but even there he likes concrete image, if he can get it.
I beheld, sorrowing, the healer's tree, till it seemed that I heard how it broke silence, best of wood, and began to speak. I was reared up a rood. I raised up the great king, liege lord of the heavens, dared not lean from the true. They drove me through with dark nails. On me are the deep wounds manifest. Wry weirds a many I underwent up on that hilltop. Saw the Lord of hosts stretched out stark. All creation wept, keened the king's death. Christ was on the cross. They straightened out his strained limbs, set to contrive him a tomb in the sight of the tree of death. Carved it of bright stone, laid in it the bringer of victory, spent from the great struggle.
It's natural enough that people that was used to thinking in terms of epic fights, and fights in desperate places against hopeless odds, should apply some of that thought to the Christian story. Christ as an epic hero figure.
The bringer of victory, spent from the great struggle.
A great controversy happened about the observance of Easter. Those that came from Kent or France affirming that the Scots kept Easter contrary to the custom of the universal church.
It's easy to forget that the Celts continued to enjoy the Christian message throughout the dark period of the 5th and 6th centuries. When they did enter, as they did in the 7th century, the Anglo Saxon scene, they proved very efficient and very effective missionaries.
The fine armour of Columba is protecting you from the fairy arrows, against the screeching cranes, against the gnawing cranes, against the temptations of the present world, against the wickedness of the world beyond.
Celtic Christianity, as far as we can judge, was after something rather more personal and individual than Roman Christianity.
It was agreed that a synod should be held in the monastery of Streonazach, which signifies the Bay of the Lighthouse, to decide the question.
When Peter preached at Rome and gave the world the hopes of resurrection, he understood that Easter ought to be observed so as always to stay till the rising of the moon on the 14th day of the first moon in the evening.
Light and darkness. The Christian church was using the first day of the natural year of full uninterrupted light to symbolize the supernatural light of the resurrection.
The Celtic church was very much more a Celtic organization than the Christian church as interpreted by the Anglo Saxons. Where it operates, you get some of your finest oral tradition and stories.
Keedman had lived as a layman until he was well advanced in years, and had never learned versifying. And for this reason, sometimes if he saw the harp approaching him, he would rise from the feast and return home. On one occasion, when he had gone to the stable of the cattle which had been committed to his charge that night, there appeared to him someone in his sleep, and he said, "Keedman, sing me something." But he replied, "I cannot sing." Then he who was speaking replied, "Nevertheless, you must sing to me." And Keedman said, "What must I sing?" And the other said, "Sing of the beginning of creation." On receiving this answer, he at once began to sing in praise of God the Creator, verses which he'd never heard. In the morning, he came to the reeve who was over him, and told him of the gift he had received. And it seemed to them all that heavenly grace had been conferred on him by the Lord.
It was with pain that the powerful spirit, dwelling in darkness, endured that time, hearing daily the hall filled with loud merriment.
Their poetry is capable of extraordinary delicacy of meaning, once one accepts the convention of the age, and once one gets used to the sometimes very heavy beat of the verse.
While my ghost lives, I go on feet, rend the ground, green leaves. When breath is gone, I bind the hands of swart Welsh, worthier men too. I may be a bottle, bold warrior swigs from my belly, or a bride may set proudly her foot on me, or far from her wails a dark-headed girl grabs and squeezes me, silly with drink, and in the dark night wets me with water, or warms me up before the fire, fetched between breasts by her hot hand, while she heaves about, I must stroke her swart part, say my name, who, living, live off the land's wealth, and when dead, drudge for men.
An Anglo-Saxon riddle. The straight answer there, an ox hide. Sometimes they give an insight into deeper emotions.
The clear song of the poet.
Where is the house of the feast? Where is the hall's uproar? Alas, bright cup! Alas, burnished fighter! Alas, proud prince! How that time has passed, dark under night's helm, as though it never had been.
Freeman. The two special things that he enjoyed were the right to bear weapons and access to public courts.
A shire meeting met at El Nothiston in King Canute's time. There were present Bishop Athelstan, and Alderman Rene, and Edwin, the Alderman's son, and Leo Wiener, Wolfseeger's son, and Thurkel the White. Then there came journeying to that meeting Edwin, Enion's son, and brought a charge against his own mother for a piece of land, namely Wellington and Cradley.
The Anglo Saxons enjoyed their law courts, there's no doubt about it. A public world, a world which rejoiced in your folk court, coming together to hear the rights of a matter.
Then she said she had no land which belonged to him at all, and she became extremely angry with her son, and called to her kinswoman, Leoflard, the wife of Thurkel the White, and spoke thus to her in front of them.
Here sits my kinswoman, Leoflard, to whom I grant after my death my lands and my gold and everything that I possess.
Then Thurkel the White stood up, and asked all the thanes to give to his wife, clear from the claim, the lands which her kinswoman had granted her, and they did so. And Thurkel rode then to St. Ethelbert's Minster, and had it entered in a gospel book.
And share the gifts God had bestowed on him, apart from the public land and the persons of slaves.
Slavery existed in Anglo-Saxon right the way through, and it's no good shutting our eyes to it. A slave had not access to public courts. A slave had not the right to bear weapons.
I worked very hard. I go out at dawn, and I drive the oxen to the field, and yoke them to the plough. However stark the winter is, I dare not stay at home, for fear of my Lord. And every day I have to plough a full acre or more. I have a boy who drives the oxen with a goad, and even now he's hoarse from cold and shouting. I fill the ox bins with hay, and I water them, and I clear out the dung. It's very hard work, because I'm not free.
Alfred, Alfwina's son, wished to subject Putro to him as a slave. Then Putro gave to Alfred 8 oxen at the church door at Bodmin, and made himself and his offspring forever free from that day.
Geert Fleda has given freedom for the love of God and for the need of her soul to Echard the smith and Alfstan and his wife, and all their offspring born and unborn.
The big dividing line in society clearly came between churl and slave.
And often a slave binds very fast the thane who was previously his master, and makes him into a slave through God's anger. Alas for the misery and public shame which the English now have, all through God's anger. Often 2 Vikings, or maybe 3, drive the droves of Christian men from sea to sea.
The war wolves waded across, mourned not for the water. The Viking Warband came west over Pant, bearing shield boards, over sheer water, and up onto land, Lindenwood braced.
Behold, Church of St. Cuthbert, spattered with blooded priests of God, despoiled of all its ornaments.
Very shameful tributes are common among us to God's anger. There has been devastation and persecution in every district, and the Vikings, so strong with God's consent that often in battle 1 puts flight to 10, all because of our sins.
Pagans desecrated sanctuaries of God, and trampled on bodies of saints like dung in the street.
And often, 10 or a dozen, one after another, raped the thane's wife and sometimes his daughter, while he looks on, although he considered himself brave and mighty and stout enough before that happened.
What assurance is there for churches of Britain if St. Cuthbert doesn't defend his own?
Viking attacks came in 2 phases. The first came during Alfred's reign.
In this year the Viking host went secretly in midwinter after 12th night to Chippingham, and rode over Wessex and drove a great part of the inhabitants overseas, and they reduced the greater part of the rest to submission, except Alfred the king. And he with a small company moved into inaccessible places in the marshes, And the Easter after, King Alfred built a small fortification at Athelney, and with the men of that part of Somerset nearest to it, he continued fighting against the Viking host.
Alfred's jewel was found near Alfred's fortress at Athelney. It's not quite 3 inches long, a gold ornament with the picture of a man on it holding 2 scepters. The back, beautifully ornamented, a fine creation in small compass. Inscribed on it, Alfred het meek gewerken.
Alfred had me made.
Alfred het meek gewerken. Alfred ordered me to be made. He ordered, too, the books most needful to know to be made, translated by him and by his team.
It seems to me that we also should turn into the language that we can all understand some books which may be most necessary for all men to know, and bring it to pass, as we can very easily with God's help, if we have the peace, that all the youth now in England, born of free men who have the means they can apply to it, may be devoted to learning as long as they cannot be of use in any other employment, until such time as they can read well what is written in English.
Alfred had me made.
Alfred was truly the Englander herd, Englander darling, the shepherd of the Angles, the darling of the English.
Then in the 7th week after Easter, Alfred rode to Edbriston, to the east of Selwood, and came to meet him there all the men of Somerset and Wiltshire and of Hampshire, and they received him warmly. And one day later they went from those camps at Ilkley Holt, and one day later at Edlington, and there he fought against the entire Viking host, and put them to flight.
Alfred weathered it. The story of the 10th century, then, is of gradual recovery, building on Alfred's achievement.
Alfred had me made.
Putting pattern into the country, a country he'd united against the Danes.
Angleland.
England.
Alfred had me made.
Perfection on a small scale. Fineness. Like Alfred's jewel itself.
Through-wrought and wonderfully ornate, a wonder on the wave.
But dangers were always close. The forest land, the sea outside, the barbarian from outside, particularly after the 10th century and the second Viking attacks.
All the insults which we often suffer, we repay with honouring those who insult us. We pay them continually, and they humiliate us daily. They ravage and they burn, plunder and rob, and carry on board.
The Anglo Saxons survive politically, and Canute, when he rules England, rules very much, it is true, as a Danish king, but in an English tradition.
Land. Angleland.
England.
And furnished forth the face of earth with limbs and leaves.
Angleland.
Shire.
Village.
Mottram in Longdendale.
Lackford.
Stalybridge.
Micklehurst.
Hoddesdon.
House.
Hearth.
Home.
So the company of men led a careless life. All was well with them.
And Edward Confessor comes back from exile as the last representative of the ancient dynasty to rule from 1042 to 1066.
Until one began to encompass evil, an enemy from hell.
I am William, by the grace of God, Prince of the Normans. It is not unjustly, but in defense of right that I have crossed the sea into this country. My lord and kinsman, King Edward, made me the heir of his kingdom, even as Harold has testified.
Then on Michaelmas Eve came Count William from Normandy to Pevensey. King Harold assembled a large army and came against him at the Hoary Apple Tree. There King Harold was killed, and many good men.
Courage shall grow keener, clearer the will, the heart fiercer, as our force faileth.
The standard was beaten down, the golden gonfanon was taken, and Harold and the best of his friends were slain.
Here our Lord lies, levelled in the dust, the man all marred. He shall mourn to the end who thinks to wend off from this warplay now. Though I am white with winters, I will not away, for I think to lodge me alongside my dear one, lay me down by my lord's right hand.
Here lies Gun, the Earl's companion.
Now in many places over the earth, walls stand, wind-beaten, hung with hoarfrost, ruined habitations. A man who on these walls wisely looked, who sounded deeply this dark life, would think back to the blood spilled here, weigh it in his wit. His word would be this: where is that horse now? Where are those men? Where is the hoard sharer? Where is the house of the feast? Where is the hall's uproar? Alas, bright cup! Alas, burnished fighter! Alas, proud prince! How that time has passed, dark under night's helm, as though it never had been.
William was anointed king by Alfred, Archbishop of York, with great ceremony. Before this, the king had sworn at the altar of St. Peter the Apostle that he would rule the whole people justly and with kingly care, make and keep right law, and utterly prohibit all spoliation and unrighteous judgments.
Wherefore, for Earl whosoever, it is afterward, the praise of livers on, that lasting is best, one in the world, before wayfaring, forged, framed here, in the face of enmity, in the devil's spite, deeds, achievements, that after speakers should respect the name, and after them angels have honor towards it, for always and ever.
Through-wrought and wonderfully ornate, a wonder on the wave.
It is not unjustly, but in defense of right that I have crossed the sea into this country.
Alfred's Jewel. The readers were Clifford Norgate, Sarah Coward, John Rye, Trevor Martin, and David Brierley. The commentary was by H.R. Loyne, Anne Ross, and Jaquetta Hawkes. The producer for The Voices of the People was Charles Parker, assisted by John Merson and John Crook. Special music, sound composition and orchestration were by David Kane, assisted by Norman MacLeod. The series was created by Michael Mason in the BBC Radiophonic Workshop.